Hey guys, Will here. Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to our brand new series on quick tips. So what we're going to be doing is every week, or maybe even a couple of times a week, we're going to be jumping into a topic that I see cropping up a lot in either the comments or in Facebook groups or forums or places like that. Something that I think needs addressing and needs clarifying to help you guys out. So today we're going to be looking at input lag and response time, refresh rate, and all the things that are necessary to choose an appropriate monitor for gaming and sim racing more specifically. So let's get cracking by talking about response time and input lag to begin with. So this is something that I see getting muddled up a lot more than I should do. People seem to think that the response time that's quoted on a spec sheet of a monitor is the amount of time that it's going to take between when they make an input either on their keyboard or the steering wheel and see a response on the screen. And indeed, the term response time would kind of, indicate that that's the time it takes to respond. Now, what you need to understand there is that response time is referring to the response time of the pixels on the panel specifically. So to be really specific about it, what it means is the time it takes for a pixel to respond to a change in color. So usually it's measured in gray to gray, but it can be any change at all. And it's measured differently throughout the industry. There's not really an industry standard for measuring response time, which is part of what creates the overall problem. But what you guys also need to understand is that input lag as a whole is influenced by a lot more than just the response time of the monitor. So input lag is made up from the response time of the monitor as well as every other component within the signal chain, from when you move your hands, whether it be on a keyboard or a steering wheel or pedals or anything like that, to when you see a response on the screen. So all of those components in your system all have an influence on the overall input lag that you'll experience. So there's input lag induced by the processor inside your wheelbase and how quickly it responds to the movements that you make with your hands. Even things like wireless keyboards and mice can induce some input lag as well. But more than that, it's also to do with the signal path throughout the PC itself as well. So the signal's got to go from the wheelbase through the USB bus. It has to be processed by the processor, processed by the driver software, and that can also be a factor as well. If it's badly written driver software, that can have a massive impact on input lag. Then it has to run through the game engine. The physics engine has to be drawn by the graphics card, so it has to go through the graphics card driver. Then it has to be spat out via the DisplayPort or HDMI to your monitor. Then it also has to be processed by the monitor as well, and that's an area that we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a moment. But the monitor processing happens, and all of that stuff has to happen before you actually see a change on the screen. And none of that stuff is accounted for by the response time that you see quoted on the spec sheet of a monitor. So it's really important to understand that response time does not indicate the overall input lag that you'll experience. Now, the reason why you don't see input lag quoted on monitor spec sheets is probably already clear to you now. It's because there's a lot of external factors there that can influence it beyond just the monitor itself. So how does all of this influence your purchasing decision? How do you actually choose a good monitor for gaming and sim racing? So there's a whole lot of factors that go into what determines the difference between a good quality monitor and a crappy monitor. Now, we're not going to go into things like the optimum width or resolution or anything like that, because that's more of a subjective thing. What we're going to talk about is things like the response time, the refresh rate. Now, the first important thing to understand here is that the refresh rate of the monitor does actually have an important impact on the overall input lag that you experience as well. So if you've got a refresh rate of, say, 60 hertz, that means that the screen's refreshing once every 17 milliseconds. So that means that if you do an input on your keyboard or your steering wheel, it's got to wait for that frame interval before it's refreshed again. And that short delay of 17 milliseconds between frames is an automatic input lag that you're going to experience pretty much guaranteed, because obviously the time it takes for you to make an input and then that frame to be calculated and then the next frame to be drawn is going to always be limited by the refresh rate of the monitor. So if you up your refresh rate to 144 hertz, that number comes down to about 7 milliseconds. And for me personally, I find the threshold of being able to actually determine input lag is around about the 10 millisecond total input lag mark. Anything below that, and I don't really notice it at all. Anything above that, and I definitely do start to notice it. And what I find, around 15 to 20 milliseconds, I can adapt to it and I can still drive quickly or react quickly. But then if I go to a faster refresh rate and lower that input lag, I definitely do notice the difference. And obviously, if you're doing things like playing first-person shooters where it's incredibly important to be able to react as fast as possible, that definitely is an advantage. So generally speaking, most good quality monitors these days have a response time of around about 5 milliseconds, again, meaning just the response time of the pixels themselves. And then if you've got a monitor that's got a relatively good quality picture engine in it as well, then, obviously it's not going to induce all that much additional input lag in the monitor itself. And again, you can't really determine this from from a spec sheet. So what I generally recommend to people is try to go for the highest refresh rate monitor that you can with the lowest response time you can find. Obviously limited by the graphics card that you have as well. So if you're not able to push more than about 60 frames a second, there's no point in spending the money on a higher refresh rate monitor because you're not going to see any benefit from that. But if you've got a system that's able to push, 200 plus frames, then you want to try and go for the highest refresh rate you possibly can because it does make a difference. Now, I find personally, again, for me, anything above about 100 to 120 hertz, I don't really see the difference. But again, that's a bit of a subjective thing. Different people have different comments about that. Jay's 2 cents actually did a really good blind test where he tested whether people could see the difference between different refresh rates on the monitor. So I'll link that in the description below for you as well to check out. The higher the native refresh rate of the panel, the less you'll see effects like ghosting as well, which also makes a big difference to the overall experience. And you also need to consider whether the monitor you're purchasing is FreeSync or NVIDIA G-Sync compatible as well. G-Sync monitors tend to be a little bit more expensive, but they do tend to, at least in my experience, offer a slightly better experience overall as well. Now, to just quickly touch on that technology, what it does is it adapts the refresh rate of the monitor to match the frame rate of the signal coming in to minimize things like screen tearing and effects like that. And it does make a very profound difference on the overall experience as well. So definitely something to consider if you can afford the extra on your budget. But the most important thing in determining whether a monitor is going to do the job appropriately or not is just reading reviews, looking at other people's experience. Unfortunately, someone has to be the guinea pig. The spec sheets themselves simply do not tell the full story. And particularly when you're dealing with cheaper monitors like Kogan monitors and things like that, there can be a massive variation even within the same model. There can be, different processors used between different batches, all that kind of thing. They want to save as much cost as they possibly can. And that means that the user experience can actually vary quite a lot between monitors, even though they might look identical on a spec sheet. Now, thankfully, there is help out there. There is a really great website, which I've linked in the description below for you guys, which basically is a test website for a bunch of different monitors. They go and they test these monitors out. They see how they perform in the real world, and they measure things like the input lag, the response time, all those things that you can't really get off a spec sheet. And that is honestly the way that I choose monitors. That's the best way I've found because it's the way that removes the most uncertainty. Now, obviously, there are still going to be other factors like, the quality of the steering wheel you're using, whether you're using wireless equipment, the speed of your PC, all those sorts of things, but that's going to be a factor regardless of the monitor that you choose. So in the context of choosing the most appropriate monitor, that is really the only way to do it and be assured that you're going to get the best possible monitor for your money. So I hope that helps, guys. I do see a lot of people confused about the difference between response time and input lag, so I really hope that that helps clear things up, and I hope that you feel a little bit better equipped now to choose an appropriate monitor for your particular scenario. So thank you very much for watching, guys. If you've got any other things that you would like covered in these quick tips, let me know in the comments below. We'll be covering these once a week at least, so I'm really looking forward to this series. And of course, if you do have any additional questions or comments, let me know in the comments section below. Let's keep the discussion going there, as well as on our Discord server. And as always, if you guys have enjoyed the video, you know what to do. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again soon. Bye.